Hello, it's the 2nd of August and you're watching our afternoon edition of Arirang News. I'm Kwon Jang-ho and it's good to have you with us. On today's show, I'll be talking trade with an expert, specifically South Korea's exports. We'll also try to cover more on Trump's escalating trade war with China and how it's affecting the Indo-Pacific region. All that's coming up later, but first we start with the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Centre. Over to you, Devin.
Hi, Jung-ho. The heat wave is where we'll start this afternoon. Yesterday's high in Seoul was a new record for the city, and Gangwon-do province saw the highest temperature in the country since records began. Now, today is not quite as hot as yesterday, but these temperatures are still dangerous, so everyone's advised to stay out of the heat and to make sure to drink plenty of water. Won Jung-hwan has the latest.
Almost the entire country is under a heat wave warning, and the temperature in the capital city soared to its highest in 111 years. Seoul's temperature hit 39.6 Celsius Wednesday, breaking the previous heat record of 38.4 set in July 1994.
I came out to play with my children because it's too hot to stay at home. The record-breaking heat is making everyone very tired.
According to meteorologists, high atmospheric pressure from Tibet and prolonged dryness have contributed to the extremely hot weather. And warm, dry air blown down from the eastern Tibet mountains has pushed up temperatures in the western and inland region, including the capital. The nights aren't much cooler either, with some parts of the country experiencing super tropical nights, where the temperature stays above 30 degrees Celsius all night. There were several incidents caused by the heat wave. In one incident, a KTX train traveling from Hangshin Station on Wednesday afternoon was without air conditioning for over an hour after the system stopped working in 10 train carriages.
The crowd all gathered in some carriage where the air conditioning was working. But to be honest, it was like a train carrying refugees, children crying and screaming.
According to the data from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 2,200 people have been hospitalized with heat stroke or heat exhaustion, and 28 people have died from heat-related illnesses since mid-May. The country has been hit by an unusually long heat wave after the rainy season ended on July 11th, and temperatures in Seoul and other parts of the country could further rise in the coming days. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
As Jung-hwan said, the heat right now is dangerous, and Prime Minister Lee Nak-yon has vowed to do his best to make sure that electricity supplies are stable so that homes and businesses can run the air conditioning. In a meeting Thursday with the relevant authorities, the PM said the government has secured a maximum power capacity of 173 million kilowatts and will not let down its guard.
Last month, the government forecast this summer's maximum power demand to 88.3 million kilowatts, but the actual demand has surpassed 90 million. The Energy Ministry's forecasting model proved to be mostly precise, but the heat has been unexpectedly severe and prolonged.
He called on other ministries and authorities to make doubly sure that power supplies are stable because when people get back from vacation in the coming days, demand is going to surge again. The remains of dozens of soldiers believed to be Americans who died in the Korean War arrived in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on Wednesday. Vice President Mike Pence spoke at a ceremony to honor their return, saying it's a sign of tangible progress towards peace on the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. military believes that most of these remains are Americans, but they could also be troops from other countries that fought in the war. Now, U.S. forensic experts will start work to identify the remains before returning them to their families, but the identification process could take anywhere from days to decades. The handover of the 55 caskets last Friday was part of the commitment Kim Jong-un made to President Trump at their June 12th summit. America's defense budget for next year has been sent to President Trump to be signed. It passed the Senate easily with bipartisan support. The bill makes it official policy that American troops cannot be withdrawn from South Korea in significant numbers as part of any bargain with North Korea. It also says the U.S. seeks the North's complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. Kim Yo-sun reports.
The U.S. Senate passed a $716 billion defense bill on Wednesday with 87 votes in favor and 10 against. The National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the U.S. House of Representatives last week, will now be sent to the White House for President Trump's expected signature. The bill sets the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea as a major goal of Washington's diplomacy, noting that the North's nuclear program poses a grave threat to not only the U.S., but also the Indo-Pacific region. It also prohibits the use of the defense budget to reduce the number of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea to under 22,000, unless the defense secretary can show that such a move does not significantly undermine the security of Washington's allies in the region, and it has been fully consulted with its allies, including Seoul and Tokyo. The bill includes tough measures on China, including a ban on Beijing's participation in the Rim of the Pacific naval exercises until it stops militarizing islands in the South China Sea. The biannual joint drill is a large naval exercise that involves 26 nations to showcase their military cooperation. The legislation also requires a Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. to review whether Beijing's investment in the U.S. threatens national security while intensifying export controls on U.S. technology. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea's presidential office says neither the country nor the president have ever forgotten about the South Korean man now being held captive by an armed group in Libya. The presidential spokesperson said Thursday that the country and the president have been doing everything possible for the safe release of the Korean man abducted about a month ago with 3 of his Filipino colleagues. The top office also said that a South Korean military force, the Cheonghae unit, stationed in the region to fight piracy, is on its way to help with rescue efforts on the president's order. The government has been in close cooperation with the government of Libya and other allies such as the U.S. and the Philippines since the day the man was kidnapped. This response from the presidential office comes a day after a video of the captives was released showing the one South Korean and his 3 co-workers pleading for their release. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa has several bilateral meetings lined up today in Singapore, where she's attending the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting. Minister Kang is first due to sit down with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at 5 p.m. local time, followed by Japan's Taro Kono and China's Wang Yi. These countries are key stakeholders in the ever-changing situation on the Korean peninsula, so high on the agenda are expected to be North Korea's denuclearization and ways to give the regime a security guarantee. South Korea's top diplomat is also likely to discuss specific issues with these countries, with Japan following up on the very unpopular deal struck with Japan a few years ago on the comfort women issue, and with China and Russia, economic cooperation as part of Seoul's new northern policy. The U.S. Federal Reserve has been in tightening mode since last year, but this month it's decided to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged. It's also upgraded its view of the U.S. economy to strong. Lee Sung-jae reports.
After a 2-day meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, the U.S. Federal Reserve held its benchmark interest rate unchanged on Wednesday, reaffirming its plans to continue raising borrowing costs at a gradual pace. The Fed, as widely expected for weeks, voted unanimously to keep the rate at a target range of between 1.75% and 2%. In a written statement after their 2-day meeting, the Fed said the interest rate was left unchanged due to the economic activity growing at a strong rate. An advanced estimate of gross domestic product for the second quarter released last Friday showed that the economy is growing at an annual rate of 4.1%, the fastest rate in nearly 4 years. Back in June, the Fed raised its target rate by 0.25 percentage points, the second such hike this year and the 5th since March 2017. The Fed policymakers also forecast 2 more hikes this year, and investors are expecting the next hike to happen after the Fed's next meeting in September. According to Bloomberg, there's a 92% probability that it will raise the Fed funds rate to a range of 2% to 2.25%. All signs point to continued small increases in the Federal Reserve's still historically low short-term interest rate. This comes as policymakers reiterated on Wednesday that further gradual increases in the rate would be consistent with sustaining economic growth while keeping the labor market strong and inflation near the central bank's 2% annual target. Lee Sung-jae, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
South Korea revealed on Wednesday that exports in July rose more than 6% on year and surpassed the $50 billion mark for the fifth consecutive month. This comes despite concerns being raised by the growing trade war between the US, China and the EU. The question is, will this be a sustained trend, or will the consequences of the trade war catch up and have a delayed effect on the Korean economy? We'll discuss that with a guest in the studio right after this report.
Korea's exports surpassed the $50 billion mark last month, recovering from a dip recorded in June. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Wednesday the country's exports recorded nearly $52 billion in July, an increase of more than 6% from the same period last year. This is a big improvement compared to June, when exports dipped by nearly 0.2% on year. 10 of the 13 main export items saw increases, including petroleum and petrochemical goods, steel, semiconductors, machinery, and computers. Semiconductor exports in particular increased for the third consecutive month in July, surpassing $10 billion, the fourth highest monthly record ever. Exports of computers also increased for the 16th straight month in July.
A global shortage of semiconductors has continued since the end of 2016. Prospects are good for Korea's semiconductor exports in the latter half of this year as well, with unit prices expected to stay at the current level.
Meanwhile, exports in shipbuilding dropped by a staggering 73.4%, followed by home appliances, which dropped by nearly 16% on year last month. Auto exports dipped for the sixth straight month in July, falling by 13.5% from July last year, as shipments to Korea's biggest auto export market, the U.S., slumped, following U.S. import restrictions.
The auto sector is also affected by changes to Korea's labor rules, including shorter working hours. But as we adjust to the changes, the ministry thinks auto exports will recover in the second half.
Exports to China and South American countries increased the most, growing by around 27% and 23% respectively. Exports to the ASEAN region and India dipped due to increased local competition. Imports also increased by more than 16% in July on year to record nearly $45 billion. The trade surplus for July was more than $7 billion. It was the 78th straight month it has been in surplus. The ministry cites favorable economic conditions for the global manufacturing sector, increases in gross domestic product among major economies, and increases in unit prices of major exporting goods for the strong export figures. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, joining us to help interpret the numbers is Professor Shin Sang-yeop from Kyung University. Thank you for coming in today, Professor.
Pleasure to be here today.
So, as we've just heard, South Korea's exports have surpassed $51.9 billion, meaning that exports have been reaching over $15 billion for the past 5 months. That sounds like good news, but what's really going on behind those numbers?
Well, it must be good news, but the question we have to find an answer is that how long such a kind of trends could continue. But I mean, to get the answer to this question, we have to analyze the current situation. As the reporter reported, the Korean export volume in July reached to $52 billion, which is the second largest amount since 2017. And as you know very well, the macroeconomic indexes in Korea said that the Korean economy is in bad shape in some sense. Then why and how we could get such a huge amount of the export volume? There must be two main reasons. The first one is that our major trading partners, such as USA, their GDP growth, economic growth in those countries over the last 7 months recorded very high. For example, in USA, the second quarter of this year, they recorded 4.1% economic growth. particularly the manufacturing industrial sector in those countries performed very well. So demands for the manufacturing products in those countries increased. As you know very well, the main exporting items, in Korea is manufacturing the products. So demands for the manufacturing products made in Korea increased in those countries. This is the first reason why how we could achieve such the increase of such the export volume over the last 7 months. And second one is the unit price of the Korean products in several industrial sectors, such as the petroleum and petrochemical industries. The increased very dramatically because the price, oil prices increased. So the unit price increase then means that it contributed to the increase of the export figure of South Korean, our exports. So these are the two main reasons why we could have such a huge amount of the increase in our exports over the last 7 months.
You started the explanation saying that the question is whether this growth could be, exports growth could be sustained. Well, that's what I want to ask you. Can it be sustained?
Well, for the time being, it could continue. But considering external factors and internal factors facing the Korean economy, I'm doubt whether how long it could continue. If I give you negative external factors, as we know very well, the worldwide trade conflicts, trade war between major economies such as USA and China, and between USA and European Union. And because of the trade, the protectionist trade, the environments, global trade environments, the global economy has been shaken. So this is the second negative factor against Korean economy. And the another one is that, when you look at the items of the major items, exporting items of Korean economy, well, we heavily rely on a few number of the items in our total exports, such as the semiconductors and then, the machineries. Those are a few number of the products are the major exporting items of Korea. So this is unbalanced, the structure of the exporting products. So this can be another negative factor against the Korean economy. Another one is, the price competitiveness of Korean exports, Korean products have been weakened. Consider all of these internal, external factors, I think the Korean economy could be in a good shape for a while, but there are also the high possibility of some slowdown factors of the Korean economy in the near future.
Perhaps one of those main concerns in the near future is the ongoing trade war between the US and seems to be the rest of the world. But let's start with some good news for now. Last week, it seemed to be a turning point when Trump met with the president of the EU, Juncker, and said that they agreed to work towards zero tariffs on industrial goods, except cars, and Trump described it as a big day for free and fair trade. Would you agree?
I think so, because when you review the past trade relations between USA and European Union, they have been good partners as well as good competitors. And then everybody, both parties knows very well if they keeps on taking their current stance. If they take the protectionistic trade policy, it could be negative factors for both of them. So they need to find a solution to overcome the current challenges. And actually the war started by the United States, and then EU take the retaliation against the USA, the protectionistic policy. So there have been escalation factors, but considering the weight of importance of each other as a trading partner for their economy, they could not, keep the current stance for a long time. So I thought it's a matter of time. When they change their current stance toward each other, I mean, trade policy stance. So I think the game is on. I mean, they started to find a solution. And they considering the importance of the weight of importance for each other's economy as a trading partner, I think there must be high possibility to find a solution about this problem. This is certainly different from the situation between USA and China. Because that, you know, for USA, China is also a very important trade partner, but for Chinese economy, USA seems to be a more important trade partner. That means, if both sides keep on the current stance about, I mean, in their trade policies, the China will have more difficulties. And on the top of this one, when you look at the economic growth happened in the USA, have achieved very high economic growth over the last several months. As I already explained, that in the second quarter of this year, USA had the 4.1% economic growth. So USA government, led by Mr. Trump, seems to get confidence. So considering all of these, I think as we know very well, USA government has stepped up their pressure against the Chinese the government. This is a little bit different from the situation existing between USA and European Union. So I think in case of the European Union and the relations between USA and the EU, there must be more possibility to find the solution to the protectionistic measures. And protectionist trade relations between two countries. But in the trade relations between USA and China, I think it will be more difficult for both countries to find a solution to overcome the protectionistic trade environments.
Do you think that confidence that you talked about that Trump and the US have right now is why suddenly Trump has decided to announce that he's considering increasing the tariffs that are planned next for China from 10% to 25% on the $200 billion of Chinese goods?
If I add one more thing, despite of the protectionist trade policy taken by the USA government, actually what USA government expected from Chinese government was to have the trade, negotiations, have some more talks for trade relations between two countries. But as you know very well, Chinese government did not have a talk with the USA. And instead of them, they also took the retaliatory action against the USA. So by stepping up the pressure on the Chinese government, they increased the tariff rates from 10% to 25% on the about $200 billion worth of the imports from the Chinese government. Well, but they want to let them return to the table, negotiation table. But as we know, as you heard already, the Chinese government said that they will take the retaliatory action if the USA government take the more protectionistic trade policy. You know what I mean? So I think, as I already explained before, I think the situation, the trade relations between USA and China seems to be a little bit different from the relations between European Union and USA.
It's a little bit like high-stakes poker
I think
at the moment.
so, yes.
Amidst all this, the Trump administration has also announced the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on his way to Singapore soon for the ASEAN Regional Forum. And before he went, he's talked about the Indo-Pacific region and how they're investing new money into it, specifically $113 million into fields focused on technology, energy, and infrastructure. It's building on the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy of the Trump administration. But what is his plan? What is this about? And how does this relate to China? Because China obviously has a lot of money invested in the region as well.
Yeah, Chinese government already announced they do make investment about the $1 trillion in the same region, which means that Chinese government has making every effort to increase their influences over the region. So it can be understood as a kind of strong challenges for the United States government. USA has strongest influences over the region. Very recently, USA government changed the name of the region. They call this region the Pacific region, but instead of it, they started to use the India. The Pacific, the region. That means They want to keep their influences over the region. I mean, changing the name of the region can be understood a kind of efforts in this context. So, I mean, in response to about $1 trillion investment plan, which Chinese government proposed, the USA government want to keep their influences over the region by introducing so-called the Indo-Pacific strategies. Then, according to this plan, the USA will make the investment equivalent to $113 million. Investment in the technology development, the project, and then infrastructure, something like that. And also, Mr. Pompeo mentioned about some negative aspects of the Chinese investment in the region. According to him, then, the Chinese government, through this investment, they want to take over the right of the operation of the major or key in infrastructure in the country, in the region. So the USA emphasized that this is the investment not for the countries in the region, but for their own national interest. And then in case of in some cases, some countries in the region, they have some financial burden because they failed to pay back the loans which provided by the Chinese government. So the USA government, in terms of the size of the investment at the moment, is incomparable, because that Chinese one is, as I already explained, $1 trillion, while the USA is planned to make about $113 million. Of course, USA government emphasized this is just the beginning, so there will be more investment. But at the moment, in terms of size of investment, we cannot compare with each other. But certainly, USA government emphasized that they will make investment not for their own national interest, but for the interest of the region. And the one thing which I want to underline is that the response of Japanese government and Australian government, they immediately responded to the USA government plan. They will join to the efforts led by the USA government. So which means that certainly they want to control, they want to prevent China from expanding their influences in the region as they planned.
Well, we're out of time, Professor, but thank you for coming in and explaining your insights and thoughts with us.
Thank you very much.
I'll be back tomorrow with more breakdowns of the day's top stories. Hope you can join us then. In the meantime, for those in Korea, do be careful of yourselves during this prolonged heat wave. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.